jump right into like, okay, the purpose of this is to talk about why you dropped out.
Yeah. Finnegan.
Alex, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well.
Okay. Tell the people who you are.
So I'm Finnegan. I'm from St. Paul. I Delta on hospitals in the New York office, and I was formerly at Columbia University.
Wow, formerly.
Yes, formerly.
Okay, well, I guess the million-dollar question is, why formerly? Why did you decide to drop out and join Palantir?
This guy dropped out of Columbia to work at Palantir, and what he says next might change how you see college forever. Check this video out.
I mean, that's a good question. There's like a couple reasons, because it's obviously like a big decision, but it's funny, one of my interviewers, when I was interviewing for the internship, actually asked me, he said, like, do you want to be an intern instead of just dropping out of college and working here full time?
Wow.
I didn't have a really good answer to that. Like, there were some classes I wanted to take that seemed interesting, but like, really for me, what like was my motivation for leaving is just that I wanted to be able to make impact. I was like tired of being in school and, doing stuff that kind of like didn't seem to matter that much. It's like maybe interesting and maybe fun to do, but like doesn't really improve anyone's lives. Where in hospitals, it's like some of the stuff I built as an intern is like sending people like back home to their families instead of being in a hospital bed. It's like improving patient care, and I found that was really rewarding and really like that. I think really just kind of sealed it for me. That I think I couldn't go back to writing short answer responses to assigned reading.
Yeah. I totally get you. And I mean, in making that decision, I'm sure it's hard because you go from being a student, everyone else is a student, and then all of a sudden, oh yeah, guys, by the way, goodbye, dropping out. How was that? Were you able to like go through those conversations with your friends easily, your family easily? How was that whole process?
I heard mixed things from my friends. Some of them thought it was a really great idea. Some of them thought I might be ruining my life.
You're crazy.
Yeah. But I don't know. I just felt like I really knew I wanted to do it. So
yeah.
What's the value of prestige if your work doesn't actually change lives? This moment highlights the cultural split, those content with theory and those driven by application. It's no wonder this mindset resonates so strongly with Palantir's mission to solve the world's hardest problems.
All right, Xion, everyone wants to know the answer to the million-dollar question. Why did you drop out?
I think, there was like a lot of considerations about like, okay, like if I, now I'm not going to have a degree, like where does that leave me?
Yeah.
And then on the other hand of like, oh, I'm going to be a Palantir, so like, who cares? Was a little bit of the mentality. And yeah, obviously like you consider like, hey, like down the line, like what's the effects of not having a degree? And I think a lot of people work towards a degree so they can get here. And so if you're already here, like what do you need the degree for?
Yeah.
Unless for like, somewhere later down the line. And even like later down the line, I think like places that might have like, that would ignore like, oh, you're at Palantir, but oh, like you don't have a degree. So like we won't even, whatever, are not places that I would even want to be at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I think like being part of like the culture where everything's like merit-based, like what have you done? Which is here. It's like that's kind of where I want to be, as opposed to like, hey, you have a degree or not? Okay, no, get out. So I think that was like one of my main considerations is like at the end of the day, like being here at Palantir opens like way more doors than it could ever close by not having a degree.
Yeah, totally agree. And why do you think like now specifically was the time? If you'd interned maybe 4 years ago or whatever, blah, 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 but why now? What's so special about being at Palantir today?
Yeah. So I think what's so special about Palantir and like Palantir today, it's just how quickly everything moves. Like a lot of people think like, oh, just go finish your degree, see if you could come back in a year or something like that. But time here is just not real. Like one year here is 10 years anywhere else. The growth in a year is going to be like magnanimous, like you shouldn't miss out on that. And I thought like at the end of the day, like I want to be here like at the start of this era, before it closes and a new one opens. And so I thought it was reasonable, like, hey, like now's the time, like get in it and be here.
Isn't this exactly what separates legacy-bound institutions from future-defining ones? If the goal of a degree is to get to a place like Palantir and you're already here, why go backward? This is the new elite, people who earn their stripes through action, not credentials.
Inspirational, man. I feel like I should drop out too,
Yeah, you should.
even though I already did.
Spiro's my hero.
And magnanimous is a big word, man.
Magnanimous, yeah.
I like it. I
that one
like
here.
it. What'd you have to say to your parents? Were they on board? Were like,
My
what are you doing,
parents, yeah.
Sion? Like,
Yeah,
what
my
was
parents, mom and dad, were both on board.
Wow.
My dad's a big carp guy. Big Dr. Carp guy.
Yeah. it? On that point, sort of, are you also a big carp guy? What's your favorite interaction that you've had with carp throughout your
Yeah,
time?
so it's funny. So I've interacted with carp a few times. The first time, though, was on my onboarding. It was my second day.
Yeah.
He was in the DC office.
Yeah.
He was just, I don't know, he was carping around. He...
Wait, what does carping around mean?
You watch him. He walks around. He's carping around.
All right, yeah. Yeah, I feel like it's really unique. You just walk around.
Yeah.
CEO's right there.
Yeah, I think that's also cool. Also paradigmatic of the Palantir culture, where
Yeah.
the CEO of the company is just walking around and talking to people and saying what are you up to, or oh, why did you do this, and actually critiquing you on some of the things that when you give answers. I don't know where, when I was telling people, they're they don't really believe me.
Yeah,
You didn't actually meet the CEO. I'm like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I feel the same. I was once telling my friends, I saw the CEO last week, and they're like, oh, you saw him, and he was in a meeting room or something. I'm like, no, we were walking along, and I was eating Oreos, and he told me, why are you poisoning your body?
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, thanks, Dr. Carp, glad to be here, too, Why did you drop out of college? And where did you go to college?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. I went to Johns Hopkins. I come from a family of immigrants, and so the primary narrative is always one of safety, one of aligning with social conventions, and so it's very, very hard to really break that narrative and do something as extreme as not getting a degree. But I think ultimately something that's articulated a lot here is are you the type of person that wants to work in a space that is so rigid that they're an overfit to these requirements, or do you want to work at a company that's going to be understanding of you as an intrinsically valuable person and one that can bring skills to the table outside of this piece of paper? And also I think that Palantir itself is just a really, really cool company that has a really good reputation. And so in many ways, I think that also works as a certain, this sort of Palantir degree.
The Palantir degree line really encapsulates something powerful. Because what's being validated here isn't just intelligence, it's courage, conviction, and contribution. And that cultural clarity, where you're seen as valuable rather than credentialed, might explain why this place continues to attract the best minds of this generation. It's a different kind of elite, built on action, not approval.
Wow, an eloquent man. Very interesting. But sort of on that point, though, you said, you're from a family of immigrants and stuff like that. How did this go with your parents? Did it bode well? How was that conversation?
Definitely wasn't there was definitely many conversations, but I think ultimately they were pretty on board. I think they realized throughout the semester how excited I was about the work that I was doing, how valuable I thought that work was, and I think they could just tell I was learning so much working here, and I think ultimately those variables were compelling to them as as well as they were to me.
Wow, that makes sense. I mean, you talk a lot about the how compelling the work was, stuff like that. What was the actual work? What did you do during your internship where you're wow, I just love this so much?
I think actually the sort of way that I started my internship is a really good microcosm to describe the Palantir internship process.
Yeah.
So I arrived on my first day,
Okay.
and the team was you get your computer, you get all set up, and my team is we have this group of providers in a hospital and observation and inpatient units that we haven't been able to make a ton of progress with. Go on site tonight and be there for 2 days and figure out what their problems are, what we could possibly help them with. And so on my first night here, I just went to the hospital by myself and was around there for 2 days, and it was really a really awesome deep end experience. I think I got onboarded really quickly.
What was one of the most really stressful times, but it ended up being the best thing in the world, where you had a lot of work for 1 week or you were sprinting for a few days, but then the result was just wow?
Yeah, I think our second on-site, we were essentially like sprinting on one of our workflows, and we were just like literally like in the lobby till like 2 a.m. And like the conclusion to the night was like, oh, like this is like we're toast.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, I imagine that's a lot of nights on inside and like, all right, we gotta go to sleep and like we'll like deal with this tomorrow. Nobody actually ever sleeps. But then like that was like the first night on the onsite, but like by the third night of the onsite, like we had like brought the you know the thing that we built for them to like such a meaningful point that like in the meeting where we were demoing it, we actually like tripled their their metrics for like it was selecting patients for hospital as home, and so like in the meeting we select like we found like 15 eligible patients, which like usually takes them like a month, and like we were just demoing it and it wasn't even done, and like they were all just kind of blown away by it, and it was really, really cool.
Isn't that exactly what separates Palantir from every other tech company? Who else sends an intern to the front line, day one, to directly solve high-stakes problems inside a hospital? This isn't corporate training. It's mission-driven execution, where outcomes matter more than optics. You don't learn by watching, you learn by doing at full velocity.
Yeah, no, it's super, super sick.
Yeah.
A homework assignment there, like, you know, your day-to-day here, what does it look like?
Right. I think one of the biggest differences is just how much more open-ended everything here, right? Everything is here. Everything is really oriented around trying to get at some end result, and you don't know, you know, how you're going to do it until you're, you know, most of the way through the process and you have the problem figured out. Whereas even, you know, maybe building something for a project in school, there's still like a relatively like clear-cut set of things you're going to implement. Whereas when I like approach a new project at Palantir, I have no idea even what the problem is I'm solving, what the technical solution to that is going to be. And so there's this, I think, really interesting process of just learning all about what the problem is before you even think about the solution. That's, I think, very rewarding.
Totally. I think it's like super interesting and different compared to school because, you know, in school it's like, this is the problem, defined it super clearly, and then it's like, oh, you just, you know, solving it's the hard part, where here it's like, defining the problem in itself is like the hardest problem you can even think of. So you were at Hopkins and you came to Palantir, you know, and the work you're doing here is obviously like different from Hopkins, but how does it actually compare? You know, if you would have been there for an extra year doing work there.
Something I learned like really quickly in my experience at Palantir is just how large the gap is between solving these sort of like rigid and theoretical problems versus actually creating operational value. I think that in university, this sort of like paradigm that you're used to is one where you're given these very well scoped, very theoretical problems. Sometimes they're very complex, but really what solving it looks like is just like following these sort of requirements and just like getting something done. And I think that my experience at Palantir has shown that like real world problems are not like that at all. And where the real difficulty lies is actually in getting in the weeds, being able to really create something that's operationally valuable is exceptionally difficult. And I think that's where like the real work lies, and that's where like the real excitement lies. And I think people think that when they think about like the sort of cutting edge of technology, they imagine all these like really these sort of theoretical developments. But the way I experience is that like that's the cutting edge, right? The cutting edge is taking these sort of like really interesting theoretical ideas, these really interesting technologies, and actually creating operational value with them. And I think like at Palantir, we're really like pushing that edge and like expanding it to all these like new areas.
This is such a powerful breakdown of what separates academic rigor from operational relevance. It's not about how elegant your code is on paper, it's about what it does in the world. And when you're sitting in a hospital, building tools that actually affect patient flow and outcomes, you realize fast, theory alone isn't enough. Palantir empowers that shift from abstract to actionable.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think, you know, people have this idea that, oh, we can do AI for everything, and we can do all this crazy cool stuff, but you walk into the hospital and we're using sticky notes out here. So very different and very interesting to see for sure.
Yeah. You've been asking me a lot of questions, but, you know, like, why did you drop out? You know, you made the same decision that we all did. Like, you know, I'd love to hear your reasoning.
This is crazy, flipping the script on me. I think I dropped out for similar reasons as you, Sion, and Finnegan. I think what I was doing in school it was important, but by no means, like, am I saying it wasn't important? It was definitely important for me to learn, But I think it was just that. It was just me learning how to, code, how to like problem solve, but actually applying that and doing anything in the real world, it's like I had none of that in school. So I think at Palantir, I came in and I had learned some things in class, how to write some functions, whatever, stuff like that. But when I actually came here, I learned so much more of how to actually apply that in the real world. So I think that impact for me was just something that I could not pass up. And then the second biggest thing for me was the people. I loved, I love you, Stuart, and I loved also like my friends in college. But what I didn't also expect was to really just love talking with all the people here at the company. I think it's really unique where I walk around and anyone who you talk to is just like the most interesting person you've ever met. Yeah. It's like, I remember meeting you and you were telling me you did 2 gap years, you went to Israel, you did all these cool things, and I was like, wow. And then the next day I would, talk to, Sion, and he told me, way less cool for sure. But I don't know, it was just super interesting to hear all these different perspectives, and everyone's just so nice to talk to, and it's you really feel it's like a home away from home. For me, it's probably closer to my home, but I really loved the people part of it as well.
There's something about that feeling. When you're learning in school, you're in a bubble. You think you're ready to solve the world's problems, but you haven't even begun to understand what real-world problems look like. At Palantir, everything's different. You get thrown into the deep end, and you learn quickly that solutions require far more than just theory. What's really striking is how he talks about the people. At Palantir, the work is tough, but having a team that pushes you and shares that vision, it changes everything. The idea of feeling like you're at home, even as you're working alongside the best in the field, it's not something you get everywhere. The learning curve is steep, but the rewards are exponential. This place doesn't just teach you to code, it teaches you how to create real impact. That's the magic of Palantir, the intersection of mind-blowing work and a community that's invested in seeing you succeed.